But we're going to start the program with a focus on another really serious problem that is just going to get worse and worse as we grow older, and that is the risk of Alzheimer's. And we're going to start there as we talk about Alzheimer's and estrogen. Estrogen also affects women's health in a number of ways, cardiovascular conditions, and just how you feel as well. So lots to talk about today, and we're going to get started with Gregg Russell, pharmacist and owner of Fort Wayne Custom RX. Gregg is also a certified clinical nutritionist, so happy to have you back.
Oh, great to be here, Lee.
What is the big takeaway for people about estrogen, Alzheimer's, and women's health?
Okay. Great question. You know, as we live longer, as you alluded earlier, people are very concerned with having an active, healthy life, and there's probably nothing that strikes terror into us is to think that we're going to sit around and not be able to do anything when our bodies are still ready. We all work hard our entire lives and save for that retirement, and then all of a sudden we have that disastrous call or you know, that you either have dementia or Alzheimer's disease, and so here we are with a disease that is increasing rapidly as our population ages, and it doesn't only affect us, it affects our caretakers and our loved ones because it dramatically impacts them. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what can we do to keep our brains as healthy as possible?
Right. And estrogen plays a role in that for women. Let's talk a little bit about the studies you found that show that there is a definite connection.
Sure. Well, the biggest studies really show, it's hard to show a cause and effect, but the biggest studies show that as women decline of estrogen, women that have the most rapid declining rates of their own estrogen are at the highest risk. Now, many people would say, well, that's because as you age, you're going to have a reduction in estrogen, and that makes sense. But then when we've looked at some smaller studies that have taken we've subtaken people out or divided them down into how much they're taking or how long they've been taken, the data is pretty clear that estrogen does play a role. And when we start looking at animal studies and research of physiology, it can be quite revealing as to estrogen's interaction with our brain.
Now, we've only really started looking at this fairly recently. I think you shared with me that the average life expectancy for a woman back in the year 1900 was 49.
That's right.
So if you made it to menopause, you were pretty lucky at that point.
That's right.
And now you might live 40, 50 years without estrogen in your body.
That's right. And so, hey, sorry guys, we only made it to 42. So the women outlived us about 7 more years.
Then, yeah.
Which, yes. So, but that's the reality is we have not had a lot of research on the aging person, except in the last 25 years. And if we look at like the Women's Health Initiative study that occurred back in the early 2000s, it was halted early, so we really didn't look at estrogen's effect on the brain as deeply as we like to. And some studies that are some studies will show that that estrogen has these major effects on keeping the health of the brain. So, for example, the brain, certain areas of the brain have these little receptors. These receptors are places where estrogen latches on. So the receptor is kind of what I call the key in the lock therapy to the brain. So when you have this key being estrogen and the receptors being parts of your brain come together, it unlocks the power of the brain. And those memories and the ability to do cognitive tasks are definitely influenced under estrogen. And you know, men and women's brains are different.
Sure.
You know?
So estrogen therapy really took a big hit with this Women's Health Initiative study that you just mentioned. So women have been given estrogen to overcome the hot flashes and all some of the other symptoms that come with menopause. And then a lot of women just stopped because this study indicated there was a real link between estrogen and breast cancer. So now we're rethinking that. What's causing us to change our thinking about the role of estrogen and whether or not it's safe?
Yeah. Well, I think we have to look at a couple things. One thing is what's the number one killer of women postmenopausally?
Cardiovascular disease.
Heart disease, right.
Yeah.
1 in 4 women die of heart disease.
Sure.
1 in 30 women die of breast cancer. So, not being female, I certainly can't put my perspective in for what a female is thinking about breast cancer. Certainly, it's a terrible, terrible disease, and nobody wants it. And there's a whole image issue as well as your own self-value and worth that comes into this. So there's a psychological fear factor, I think, that cancer breeds that heart disease does not.
Sure.
But as we look even at some of the big studies, when we look at mortality rates, you'll see that as women have less estrogen, their heart disease goes up dramatically and surpasses men by about age 70. And the severity of that disease can be it can be worse.
So today's thinking about estrogen is it's protective against cardiovascular disease. We now understand that it can help prevent problems with dementia and Alzheimer's. And there are some other benefits as well. So why are we not more widely using estrogen therapy?
I think that's a great question. I think one of the problems we have is we've not had studies to show if we give estrogen at somebody who's got dementia or Alzheimer's disease, we can't show that there's an improvement. It's such a devastating disease. It's kind of like the horses out of the barn, I think. The damage is already done. But what we do know in research, for example, we know that estrogen can affect those tangles, those neurofibril tangles that we call the beta amyloid, and that estrogen plays a role in clearing that out of the body. So if we can prevent it from starting, that's one of the thoughts. There are other ways that estrogen affects the brain too, Lee.
Sure. But let's get back to the point of we can't use estrogen as a therapy for Alzheimer's. We need to think of it as a potential prevention, another step in the chain to help improve your odds of not having that disease.
So if we kind of come back to your question, if we look at why some of those studies didn't look good, you have to differentiate between the conjugated estrogens that are available, that are commercial, and our own estrogen that our body makes, our natural production of estrogen.
Okay, so we're going to dig into that here. I think that's pretty interesting. So you just said conjugated estrogen, and to the rest of the world, we don't understand that if you take an estrogen tablet or capsule that's commercially produced, you're taking an estrogen that comes from where?
Pregnant horses' urine. Pregnant mare urine.
So they keep horses and keep them pregnant and collect urine and use that to make these over-the-counter, the prescription medications? Right.
What they do is they harvest off those hormones. The problem that we have with those specific hormones, there are two of them, equilin and estrone, that, especially equilin is a hormone that's only in horses, it's not in human beings. So when we look at the Women's Health Initiative study, and you look at the conclusions that they came over, they said all estrogens cause this. And I think that's the greatest concern is they didn't prove all estrogens. They proved that equilin and estrone and some estradiol, but these are primarily made of equilin and estrone, those hormones themselves were associated with cancers and increased health risk.
So the alternative then is to not use those products and use estrogen that comes from where?
Well, why not use the estrogen that our body produces? So what we do is we use natural estrogen products. Those are products that can be, they're actually derived from plants, but they are chemically and structurally identical to the hormones that your body produces. And the big two that we use is estradiol and estriol.
So these are molecularly identical to what's in my body today?
Absolutely.
Now, what do the studies show about whether they're safe?
Well, it's very interesting because when you start looking, for example, at a Finnish study, and you start looking over in Sweden or some of the European studies, they noticed that when you use topical estrogens, natural estrogens, that actually breast cancer rates were pretty much neutral.
So no effect on breast cancer?
No effect.
And the healthcare professional on the job this half hour is Gregg Russell from Fort Wayne Custom RX. He's a pharmacist, also a clinical nutritionist, and we are talking today predominantly about estrogen. And we were just here in the studio saying, boy, this topic is complex. Hormones are weird, aren't they?
Very weird. And they'll make you act weird if they're out of balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of the focus today is how can we get through menopause with estrogen. So you produce a cream that you apply daily that is bioidentical to the hormones in our body.
That's correct. We work with doctors to try to match what they kind of come up with a recipe of what they want, the percentage of the hormones. There's integrative physicians in this area that prescribe them, monitor them, and try to really limit your risk for developing these cancers and other health concerns.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about the studies that linked estrogen or hormone therapy to increased in breast cancer, but what a lot of people miss out in that same study, showed that women on HRT had a lower rate of colon cancer.
Right.
So it's a good and a bad, and breast cancer got all the publicity, and it scared a lot of women away.
Yes, it did.
Now, you just told me you believe that you think even after the symptoms of menopause fade, you should still be on some form of HRT.
Well, I believe that basically you need to make sure your hormone levels are at a certain level, because there are some protection effects. So obviously we know that estrogen, for example, we know estrogen's good for bones. And as women age, their increased risk of fracture goes up because estrogen's very dramatic in maintaining bone health. Mm-hmm. That Women's Health Initiative study, when it came out, it said, well, we know it's good for bones, but we don't believe we should use it to help bones. However, I personally know a trauma physician who told me he could tell which women took estrogen and which ones didn't when they had broken bones.
Wow.
So there's a major impact on your bone health.
That is significant. Okay, let's jump into some myths and facts here real quick. Mm-hmm. Estrogen may have a role in preventing Alzheimer's and protecting brain injuries. True, false?
True. There are several studies that show that declining levels of estrogen and menopause play a role. Different ways that estrogen may have this effect is, we talked about earlier, the brain receptors that trigger and get turned on, the key and lock theory. We also know that, like statin drugs that help cholesterol become oxidized and cause vessel damage in the heart, estrogen has the same protective effect on oxidized cholesterol, or rusty cholesterol is what I like to call it. Mm-hmm. It reduces free radical damages of the cells. And one of the most interesting things that we look in anti-aging is we look at the length of a telomere. A telomere is the protection on your DNA. And kind of think of it as Teflon coating that prevents the damage that occurs in the cell. And we know that estrogen plays a role in protecting that. And then we also talked about earlier how these different enzymes that break down plaque, if we can get that production of those enzymes up before plaque starts, then maybe we can get ahead of the curve. And I think that's where some of the research is looking at. Oh,
that's fascinating. So here's another one. Estrogen increases death rates with long-term use. Myth or fact?
Okay. False. It is a myth. A 2015 study in Sweden showed that actually they found that they followed 500,000 women for 15 years. And what they showed was that women that weren't on hormone therapy actually had higher death rates from heart disease. And so the one thing you can say about the Swedish people is they have a national health service, so they know who's taking their hormone products. They know if they're taking them or not taking them, mm-hmm. whether they're buying them or not buying them. And so they found, what I think is most fascinating was the longer you took them, the less was the mortality rate.
Oh, so death rates declined with longer use.
With longer use, which stands kind of against some of the shorter studies we've seen. So what that tells me is this is a population study. So it tells me we need more research on women using hormone therapy for longer.
Yeah.
One of the flaws with the Women's Health Initiative study was they actually used it in older women and didn't use it in younger women.
Right.
So maybe the effect that estrogen could help heal was diminished because it didn't get started in the younger women.
Right, exactly. I've read that criticism of that study. Mm-hmm. All forms of estrogen have been proven to cause cancer equally. Is that a myth or fact?
That is false. We do know that, for example, we talked about the horse estrogens. Mm-hmm. Those estrogens are foreign to the body, and when we talk about the key and the receptor theory, it's kind of like if you put gum down on something. You know, if it makes it sticky, it doesn't work. So if you have a wrong type of estrogen hitting that lock, it makes that lock sticky or not work, and so the cell doesn't work. Estrogen is very potent in how it affects your DNA, and DNA makes proteins. Proteins makes action in your body.
So if I don't want to take any form of hormones, but I still need some relief from the symptoms, the night sweats, the hot flashes, and all that stuff that women have to go through. What's available? What can I use?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to look at lifestyle. Okay, so we do the obvious things first. Are we drinking enough water and keeping ourselves hydrated, for example? So we talk about hot flashes. Are we getting adequate rest, through the day, or are we overdoing it? Stress hormones play a role. Are we doing the proper relaxation? Are we good with our psyche? Are we getting enough fiber in our diet? Are we getting enough fruits and vegetables? We now know that lots of fruits and vegetables have chemicals that act like estrogen, what we call the phytoestrogens. And those estrogens are actually good estrogens. They just have a diminished effect, so you have to eat them abundantly. Are we eating the good foods? And then probably one thing that if somebody comes in for me for a consult that they think is probably a strange question, I will ask them, do you poop? If you're not pooping, then you can't get rid of the bad estrogens.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure you're getting plenty of fiber and that you're having those bowel movements that you need to remove those bad estrogens out so that we can rebalance those estrogens. So that's the lifestyle component, and there's more than that, like watch your alcohol intake, certainly stop smoking, and try to keep your body weight at the right weight. But when we start going into, we've formulated some different nutritional products that we've had made for us at our pharmacy that have different herbal ingredients that have different effects.
So tell me more about that. So this is something that you've had you've had produced yourselves?
Right. So for example, we had a formula made that had 3 ingredients in it. It had black cohosh, it had chaseberry, and it had dong quai in it. And these herbs have an impact on how your body senses estrogen. So we don't really know exactly all the mechanisms, but black cohosh has been around for centuries and centuries. The Chinese used it for many different things. And many of these things have, again, indirect estrogen effects by affecting things like luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone is a hormone that's released in the brain that signals the body to make the hormones, okay, like the estrogen and progesterone and testosterone, which are totally different subjects, but
right.
And so getting the right amount and the quality product that we know that we've sourced these, we know these are good quality products so that they work is really important to us.
And so this is a new product that you're offering?
It is a new product that we have at our pharmacy, yes.
And what
it's called Black Cohosh Plus.
Okay, so that's what I asked for at Fort Wayne Custom RX. They're up there at 425 East DuPont Road, and you can find them online at fwcustomrx.com.